1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Testing. Okay, every time I try to do one of these, I've a lot of difficulty trying to start where I should be starting or could be starting because there's so many starts, so many beginnings. And I know every time I speak, talk, and try to explain this, I'm probably confusing people. Some of it I'm still confused about myself. I come from the Irish traveller community, a community that is ancient and old and does not come from the colonial world. It has intermixes, it has over and backs, it has similarities. We're sharing the same language, but we are not from that world. So the reason I'm doing these podcasts and these involvement with the arts is to show another perspective, something different. And maybe you'll explain a little bit why I'll be doing any of this. As mentioned, I grew up. I am an Irish traveller, and I grew up in that culture. And our culture would have been different from the Irish settled culture. The Irish settled culture was more Englishy than anything else. Yeah, I know people get kind of off-put when I start talking stuff like this because if I don't elaborate or explain in more detail, it sounds one way or the other. Bitter, giving out, lashing out, anti-English, which is none of that. It's just difficulty trying to use words that are not yours from a language not necessarily yours and coming from a different mentality not of yours. So it's that communication. So I suppose on the traveller side, I'm looking at this, and I grew up with this. This is since I was about 5 or 6, looking at this, I guess. And a living nightmare in many ways because you don't have the formal education to sharpen and the discipline the mind and the look in the right places. At least that's what I thought for a very long time. But then again, I also thought that educated people were intelligent people. And that even without my education or best of forms of communication, surely they could see through, I suppose, my misery, situation, environment, and use their intelligence to communicate in that way. Apparently it didn't work that way. So when I take a step outside of that, when I say outside of that, I suppose it's the English language, the English way of thinking, the English systems and the institutions. And if you don't come from there, it's that bit much easier. But nevertheless, when you're in that environment, it does most certainly take a grip on you. It brings you along, drags you along, sends you in various different directions. And again, if we take a step back from that and we look how that language came to Ireland, it came to an island that had its own culture, tradition, language, or languages, and quite an advanced culture, even more so than the rest of Europe. It doesn't mean they didn't have any less issues, but they were a different kind of world. The Irish one was primarily based on honour and respect and so on and so forth. The rest of Europe was based on profits and a lot of colonisation, stuff like that. This is not to say the Irish are victimless, blameless, and all of this. It gets far more complicated than that because you have to remember that Ireland was colonised. It ended up speaking and still does primarily today using an English language as its first language. And I have this strong feeling that the English language is a system language and it's different from the rest of the human languages in terms of how it came into development or how it was used. Maybe something to do with the way it was institutionalized. And then we mix that with the powers of institutions of religion. And if you go back from a bit further back to Rome, you would have a Christendom. I'd imagine Christendom or Christianity didn't happen till Jesus died, maybe, because Christ, Son of God, maybe in around that time. Anyway, my point is that religion got hijacked again by, I suppose, politics, greed, corruption, and also the silent partner, which would be the privateers, the profiteers, different kinds of profits, power, dominance, control. And they've been kind of battling it out, three-way battle for a very long time. Who would hold dominance over the masses? Who would control them? Sometimes you would team up, sometimes you would unite, but they're always trying to knock the other out and take over. And all they're really doing is running institutions. Now, take a step back again and just pause. Remember, Ireland was a Irish-speaking language society with different norms and cultures and traditions, educated, intelligent, and this is evident. I mean, the world knows this about the old Ireland, very advanced part of Europe. So when the English language, which was used as a program in institutions, taking off, I suppose, from or joining up with the anglicized version of religion, I suppose. And again, religion broke in many different directions because of politics also. So you got 33,000 different divisions within Christianity. That's a lot of different opinions. So the politics would break it down, chop it down, and create their own little groups and their own believers and in groups and out groups and all that kind of stuff. But the English language, when it came here, was institutionalized and then it was administrated. In other words, not everybody got the language, was given the language, afforded the opportunity, not a particular style of the language. And this particular style was required or kept for the people who were using it, administrating it, and creating programs and all of this, I suppose, literature and change in the institutions and in the mentality by feeding through these institutions. Would it be the Protestant ministers? Would it be the Catholic priests? Would it be the companies that now run the religion or run the education systems? It was like a three-tier system. You had the people at the elite, the people who were running it. So they got the highest level of education to, I suppose, run systems, run companies, and run countries like companies. They're the perks of that level. Then beneath that, as I see it, is like universities and colleges. And these are primarily geared towards middle class people, kind of a step down from the elites. In some ways, there are many steps down, but in terms of their thinking about the system and their programs and how they've been taught, um, they're pretty much the same. Beneath that, you've got the public schools. Depending on which country you are, public schools are a kind of it's hard to describe it. It's kind of like just for anyone and everyone, and it's compulsory that at least you speak this level of this language and understand this level of its mentality and its programs and the ways you should think and how to think. Um, but it's no, it's miles away different from the middle classes' opportunities in their styles of education, and of course, then it's worlds apart from the people that run the education systems. So that's kind of the companies, the privateers in the education system, the institutions coming one, where almost religion and politics becoming a distant second and third, or at least still hanging in there, or are part of it, working for the dominant strain in this. I speak like this and talk like this because I'm trying to you to use your imagination more so, because I don't have these formal qualifications and I haven't been in your institutions long enough. I've seen systems, but I've usually seen the back end of them and see it from a different perspective. And the fact that I do come from a community with an historical origins in that culture of natural development and languages and traditions, I also hold that part of the mentality. So I'm using these words, and I know that these words you would have heard before, but they're not my words. They're probably not yours either. So I'm hoping you can use your intelligence more so than your educated mind, your disciplines, and all that you think you know. So when this program came to Ireland, institutionalized people by force, by laws, by acts, by policies, by landscape. Everything was to be adapted and absorbed into this new way of thinking. This went on for centuries, and this is what we call the conquest of Ireland, not so much the invasion. The invasion happened long before that, but there wasn't this kind of program. And I think maybe because it was the 1600s, in around that time, maybe it was the time of, it was the time of colonization by the other countries, France, Germany, Holland, Denmark, and I'm sure there was a few more, Spain. Interestingly enough, the English language is the mother tongue of all of them other colonies because it has all of their words combined into the English language, and particularly in the early stages of its development. This is why I see it as a trade language and a system language. It went on to do its own thing when Rome fell, which had the power of a politics and religion. When they had colonized England for centuries, they were doing what they were naturally doing, colonizing. So when the English picked up when they had left off, this language, which was not like the Latin or the Roman or any of the other languages, this system language took up the imperial mentality. I believe probably one of its first followers would have been a guy called Nikolai Machiavelli, I think his name is. He would have been from the, I think it's the Greek or Roman times, one of these intellectuals. Socrates, I think is another guy. Plato. Anyhow, these were kind of the intelligent people behind the language, or behind their language. What happened was, because the English language was created out of trade, profits, greed, ups, down, take, rob, kill, sleep, it kind of took a different kind of meaning than these people. So they engineered it, administrated it, and indoctrinated it into the people. And again, in various different levels. Who got what, who deserved this, who was entitled to that. And this is just a way of mind control. I know this sounds a bit crazy, but then again, this is the world I come from, and this is the one I see. So in Ireland, they had set up their institutions, particularly Trinity College, which I think was funded by Henry VIII. Not against these people. These people were colonized themselves and believed what they were doing in them times, at them times, were the best interest for them or their people. I'm not quite sure. It did mean a lot of atrocities didn't go in behind them. I suppose another thing worth mentioning is that when they came with the Protestant version of Christianity, the Protestant actually just means protesters. They were protesting against the Catholic rules and regulations that were quite contradictory to their own actions, which is still very familiar to this day. So I've nothing against Protestants, but when it was their turn to run the institutions, they went out and forced their beliefs and their ways onto the people. They give people choice, they give people options, but usually the other option choice behind them choices and options was punishment, persecution, and even death. It's not to take away the history of what has happened on the island, but it is a bit complicated for most settled people to understand. Because when you're thinking now Irish traveller, and then you might be thinking Irish people, but have you asked yourself, why is one called Irish travellers and one called Irish settled? You're forgiven to think that traveller means travelling and settled means being permanent. In some ways it is like that, but it's the old story of nomadism and civilization that is ancient old. So, yeah, this language took its grips, it's institutionalized, its departments, its laws, its acts, its politics, its everything. Everything that came with that program and developed was administrated throughout Ireland. So eventually you had an English-speaking island. They had, of course, resistance. People are Irish, they feel Irish, but they feel also trapped behind something they hate and can't find a way out of it. Sometimes you might see this reflected on being anti-English but supporting English clubs, and variations like that. They want to stay angry, they feel the need to stay angry, as we all do, because we believe that's what makes us different. That's what keeps us from being different, or keeps us from being the same, I should say. But in this colonial program, this imperial mentality, this language, the whole nature of it was to smash up societies, break down religions, crush cultures, traditions, ways of being, ways of seeing. It was to chop up society into groups. And within these groups, you would create communities. Within these communities, you would create individual leaders. And all part of a process. It's a bit like a river flowing, and one is being changed by human involvement, changing the nature and the landscape that creates a divergence in the river. They may redirect a river that flows, and they may put flowers around it, and they may call it a different name, and they may dump all the rubbish on the other one. But it's the same river. I'm using that analogy because it's one that connects us as human beings. Different names, different styles, different labels, different places. I believe we all flow from the same place. So as a traveller outside of this colonial mentality, this is the only perspective I have. I grew up with this. I know it sounds fucking crazy. It might even sound alien to you. Not that I'm an alien. Fuck's sake, I'm not an alien, so please. But I suppose alienation would sound familiar because we came from a community that has been isolated centuries, at war for over 1,000 years, with that program, with that mentality. It's nothing against the people. But when you see how it breaks down people, as I mentioned, the societies, the communities, to the individuals, that's its ultimate design. The people that designed the 500-year-old program, long day now, I'm sure of it, that was their conspiracy, that was their power, that was religion, politics, and the privateers coming together to change the mentality of the island. It's a bit like what's done is done and what's gone is gone, and what does any of this matter? I suppose I'm here at this present moment saying these things. That's why I think sometimes it's best to use your imagination and not try to understand everything that I'm trying to say or break it down or think, where am I coming from? Where am I going with this? It's kind of like stepping outside your educated mentality. Everything you thought you knew and was learned, or you had learned. Again, people might see that as a form of imagination and fantasy and a utopian, they call it, outside of I don't know what they call it, outside of. But where I come from, it's just outside the colony, outside of that particular mentality. And if you thought of it or think of it or see it like a neurological disease that was just leaked, particularly about 500 years ago, more so, where it became laboratorial, no, that's not the word, something to do with laboratory, laboratized, that's not even a word, institutionalized anyway. This is why I try to explain to you, use your imagination more so, and hear my voice and where I'm coming from. Because I'm shit at communicating like this. When I try to talk in somebody else's program, they think you're trying to sound like them, be like them. And I'll tell you, go and read this and do that and so on and so forth. And it's a very great difficulty because I didn't have any institutional type disciplines or so on and so forth. And it's not to knock the education system as an evil. As I mentioned, it has been taken over and hijacked by the companies. So now it has a particular focus, and it seems to benefit the companies, where once it would have benefited religious beliefs. So it's kind of taking a step outside of that and seeing this particular language and its mentality and its creation and its origins and its everything in a very simplistic and imaginary kind of way. This is the only way I can see it and feel it, and maybe in the arts I can elaborate more on this, because saying it is difficult, I can assure you. Okay. So it does break people down individually. And if you think about it as a system language, a trade language, and you look at the global economy, it's companies, it's businesses, it's from the classroom to the morgue. Is it going to cost you? It takes people away from their communities. It takes them away from nature. People might think this is some kind of oddball story. But keep this in mind when I keep saying this. I don't keep saying it, but I gotta keep saying it, I suppose, is that I'm here now speaking, saying these things. And I come from a community that has been severely persecuted by this language and its systems and its institutions to this day. So when I speak about it in historical terms and where it might have come from and how it might have worked, and much more of it I'm sure I will go into and give better and greater details if I can think them. But it's difficult even holding it in this kind of balance because I know it spins off so many different directions for so many different people. And they think it's over there, it was then, it was that place, where is it? You just need to take a step outside all of that and try to see this language in measurement. In other words, you can see its beginnings, you can see where it grew and where it spread and where it's at. It's not that it's an evil thing or anything. It's something that we can understand because it is not our language and it is a trade language. And the only thing this language hasn't done so far, and it's on its way, is to colonize Mother Nature. Because within the origins of that language, it was solely about mind control, obedience, profiteering, colonization. And I mean, that was its origin. You might say we could overcome that. Times are different and we're free now. But if you look a little carefully and you see in 1922 in Ireland, where they hadn't changed any of them systems, any of them institutions, and kept using them and building upon them. So you might think, well, what else would they do or could they do? And these are difficult questions to answer. But we do know that it's still killing people the world over. And my point, I guess, is that if I'm here saying these things, and this particular Irish settlementality that's been locked into that particular way of thinking, much, much longer and deeper than our community. And if they do not recognize who we are, and they can't understand what they're doing to us without even knowing they're doing it, if they have traumas themselves, all of these things, I know it sounds a bit crazy, but it's like if the whole island is colonized, is still neurologically colonized in a state of mind that is not natural to its nature or environment. And it looks like in 1922 to continue to educate themselves more so now because it became widespread. It's as colonization had won and we had accepted it. Maybe we had no choices at particular times in previous times' history. But we are far more intelligent people than we were 100 years ago. And we must give ourselves credit that even people with no education or think differently than we do or come from different places than we had can't have a worldview and have a perspective that could be valuable in understanding even global issues. I do not say this without any exaggeration. This is what I see, this is what I feel, and it's only more and more in recent times it's coming to me. It's one of those things, I think, when you kind of slow down from yourself because you're always in a rush and the mind is always racing. It couldn't be any other way in the environment I came from, the world that was spinning around me. But eventually you start to overcome that. You get beyond this language. You start to see it as programs. If you think about it in this way, that if you take the education system, break it down even to the classroom, down to the individuals, it's always about sit down, do what you're told, raise your hand, put your hand down, please, yes, do well, get rewarded when you do, punished when you don't, get in line, stay in line, be on time. And these are just the simple principles of education. But given the education system is already influenced both by religion at one level and the institutions throughout, it seems their curriculum is missing a lot. Is there something not quite right with it? Again, if you take the cannot see travellers, we had people tell us go back to their own country, and yet they're calling themselves, we are Irish people. It is not to take away people's nationalities or their identities. It's about overcoming what I believe is a global trauma, not just Ireland anymore. When I grew up trying to understand this, and trust me, it was not easy, because I was already shattered, broken, damaged. And the more I knew, the more it was pouring into me, I guess. You see it not just at a local level, but at a national level. You see the history of it. You see the spread of it. And I already had been growing up watching people like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, Maria Yellowhorse, Braveheart, people like Mark Charles lately, and various other people that I came across on YouTube later in life. I was looking at biology when I couldn't even understand the jargon of it, listening to people like Noam Chomsky when I didn't understand what he was saying. But I was fragments, bits and pieces that I was pulling from each one, trying to understand my own understanding of what I was trying to understand. And it basically just came down to is that it's colonization. It's a neurological divide. The Irish travellers and settlers were divergently separated 360 years ago on this island. When people think that, they are given the impression and the program to think that they are superior, they made it, they evolved, therefore we must have lagged, we must have broken down, we were inferior, we couldn't move with the times. But that is only a program perspective. Because when you take a step away from that or out from that, or even our perspective, we would say you're saying all the things that program forced your ancestors to believe in the first place. And the fight and the wars that you had was maybe to change the system, but you hadn't. So if you hadn't changed these systems, and you've been teaching yourselves the lessons taught and brought upon or by these systems, its curriculum, its criteria, its policies, all of that you've been feeding yourselves over and over again, when that what was that destroyed us in the first place. The same institutions, same education. It's not about getting rid of the English language or the English systems. It's about accepting that Ireland is still colonised and it is still persecuting its Irish people. People, they have given us so many labels. Travellers, thinkers, itinerants, many rude ones, knackers, gypsies, pikeys. Labels after labels after labels. And for centuries, we had been tamed and we had resisted and we have held our own. We've nothing against the settled world. We've nothing against settled people. We've nothing against any people once we truly, fully understand who we are ourselves. And what I mean by truly, fully understanding is the understanding for 5 centuries we've been persecuted. 360 years we were being broke down and divided from once Irish society now being colonised into settled people. That was the idea and the program. That was its design. That was its systems. And systems produce outcomes. And if systems had not been changed, the systems continue to produce the same outcomes as they had. So when you take a step back and you see it slightly differently, you will see that language went through a lot of development in Ireland at the expense of humanity. From there, with its companies, politics, and even religion, they spread in various different parts of the world. But Ireland was the first overseas country to be colonised by England. Nothing against the English people. This is what happened. And again, if you're thinking, what does this matter? Look around you. Think about it. If this language has you thinking and feeling the way you are, if this language has brought a lot of destruction, despite the fact it also has brought a lot of good. But remember, religion is good. Companies are good. Politicians are good. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that something isn't right with the world. This language, like a neurological disease, has spread and has crippled global economies, domestic economies, their domestic policies, foreign policies. It's a program after program after program. And what happens is, when people do not understand it as a program, as a trade language, they become that. So it doesn't matter what nationality you are. It doesn't matter what community you come from. If you're long enough in the systems, the programs, the institutions, you too will play by the rules laid out by that system. And eventually you think them rules are real and the system is real. No different from religion, politics, and companies. So my point is that we've individualized the world. What you feared and what you were taught to fear and feel to fear was just a program. It doesn't mean the world wasn't wilder and people weren't fighting as much. Who knows? But in comparison, again, with the good, the bad, and the ugly, when you take a look at this, look at where we're at now. We've created a world of individuals, programs. We've created institutions that are saddling people to death for profits, while getting them to believe in themselves to do these programs, where sometimes, most times, these jobs are not even available. It's like a human factory of processing, all variations of different programs, whether it's specialized programs, whether it's military type programs, whether it's classification, whether it's categorized programs, exclusions. All of these are labels after labels put on humans that came from a program that was designed to do that in the first place. So it's about coming away from your mentality and everything you think you know. It's about trying to say, this language isn't my language. I'm using it. I have the ability to use it, but this is not my language. It's not that I'm trying to rid of the language. It's saying it is not mine. It does not mean I cannot own it, that I cannot take ownership over it, that I cannot be the person that dominates this language instead of this language with all its programs, all its ideas dominating humanity. We have smashed up global communities and societies where once you had a variety of different cultures, different identities, different ways of seeing the world, learning, which should have been a natural mix of learning, became 500 years of imperial indoctrination, where it had gone to other worlds and forced them to believe in this program, to follow these steps, to read this and read that, in the same way they had developed over the centuries in Ireland against our will. It had gone to other countries and did the same thing. You see, America speaks this language, Australia, Canada, and various other parts. It does not mean they are the villains. It's something that has happened, but it's something we can take ownership over and understand. And there is no other country less involved in many parts. You think Europe is the creation in some ways of this language. It is made up from various parts. But when it goes to other countries, whether it went to continents, China, India, Japan, or not Japan, but other parts of the world where it dominates it around it. It controls it from the outside. Because now when you think about the global economy, how this particular program controls vast parts of the world and what they do, how much they have to pay, how much they owe, and still taking their resources and their energy. That's company colonial powers that has escalated beyond, I suppose, most people's expectations. You might think this is all brilliant, individual rights, liberties, and everyone has a right to follow their dreams and pursue whatever. At the expense of who? I mean, if we started off as communities and peoples, and we're broken down as societies into groups and communities, and then individualized by a system and institutions at one level, one degree or another. And then these other countries are modelling what they now must believe is a form of Stockholm syndrome, being brainwashed. Ireland, again, is a prime example. Something we can overcome, we can change, without even damaging the system, without even damaging the language or its mentality, improving it, taking ownership over it. So I see it vastly widespread. I see a neurological planet that's wired together. We are genetically connected, but we're being neurologically divided into labels and others. It doesn't mean these fears might not have been there. And when you look at human nature and our existence, we were once something else's morning, dinner, and snack. Fear would have come there. That's trauma in itself. But like everything else, if we can have these conversations, and you think you might understand where I'm coming from, then maybe we can overcome all these kind of historical fears. Because if you know something different than what you knew before, surely you would see things differently than you had seen them before. This is why I say outside the colony. It's not to be offensive to anyone. It's just outside that particular mentality. And anyone and everyone can do it. Take care.